Hi everyone, this is Paul Asadoorian with Security Weekly. I'm here at RSAC Conference 2019 with Jeff Hudson, the CEO of Venafi. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yes, nice to have you here. Now, we were just kind of briefly discussing at a very high level machine identities. And for our audience, what are machine identities?
So let me give you some context. There are two actors on a network, people and machines. And people, to identify themselves and to get access to machines, use usernames and passwords. Then
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah, well, but that's what we've got.
Absolutely.
But then the machines have to talk to one another. But they don't use usernames and passwords, they use machine identities. And we know that today, Gartner says we're spending about $10 billion a year worldwide to protect human identities, but just starting to protect machine identities, just starting to really even understand it. The number of machines is going through the roof, because in cloud workloads and containers and Internet of Things and everywhere, the number of machines is accelerating. And bad guys like to steal identities, machine or human, and use them in their attacks. And so what we have done is created the technology that's used by 350 of the world's largest and most advanced thinkers who are driving digital transformation to protect their machine identities from being stolen and used in attacks.
I feel like it's right out of almost like a Marvel movie where my superpower is I can assume a person's identity or a machine's identity, and that's what many attackers are doing with their attacks, is basically assuming that identity and then exploiting trust, correct?
Right, yeah, exactly. What you do is, it's one of the best known attack vectors, is you steal somebody's identity, and then you get their trust naturally if you use their identity. So if somebody's an employee at a very large bank and they steal somebody's ID, they can get in and do all kinds of things in the bank. Same thing with machines. But we don't see that. You see, we see usernames and passwords because we use them every day. But if everybody's just assuming it's all taken care of, but it's not.
Right.
And the way we know that is one simple little way to diagnose that. Companies around the world all the time are having certificates expire, and certificates of machine identity type, which means they're not keeping track of them.
Right.
And we've seen some huge ones recently. We saw Equifax. We know what that led to. And a certificate expiring led to the Equifax breach. We saw with the Ericsson switches that cell phones in Japan, about 70% of the cell phones in Japan didn't work for 6 hours because of an expired certificate. So
yeah, they're hard to find, especially when they're buried on a machine somewhere, right? And they're easy to forget about.
Very easy to forget about. And today most people say, well, I've got spreadsheets, or I've got homegrown database or something like that. But the speed at which these things are now moving around, it just boggles the mind. I
feel like long ago when I was a pen tester working with Unix systems, we would exploit the trust in the R services, right? Like R shell and things like that. But that's essentially been carried forward over the years, where machines trust each other in a similar sense. We may use certificates today, but there's still a trust between those systems. We use certificates, we use keys, and it applies to servers, laptops, it applies to cloud workloads, it applies to algorithms, it applies to APIs. There's API keys. If you attach to an API, how do you know if you trust the API? Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. And even we actually had
algorithms like blockchain,
yeah,
you know, they use these things called machine identities.
Speaking here at RSA, I'll talk about an incident that we had where in our CI/CD process, right, the Jenkins server has to talk to the Docker server, and they have to trust each other to send commands and execute the process. And if you don't put authentication behind that, an attacker will exploit that. Like, hey, that's open now because you didn't put any authentication between the machines. Or if it was, they could have exploited it. And I feel like there's a lot more of that today because of the way we deploy modern applications.
Well, it's exploded. And exactly right. So you said CI/CD pipelines, and the way they're supposed to work is at some step along the way, they need to get an identity for the container or for the virtual machine.
Sure.
And so where do they go to? Well, a lot of times developers will set up their own little CA on their laptop to take care of this. And now you've got all these places creating these these identification badges that give access to a network, and there's no policy control, there's no visibility. It's just amazing what we find when we go into these organizations and they say, we think we got a problem. Spend a week with them and say, here's your problem, and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize it was like this.
Right. So how does Venafi help with this particular problem? Is it is it an agent? Is it a network sniffing, an API hook, or?
So the problem at the highest level is that people don't have visibility. And we see it all the time. If something's going to expire, it's because you didn't know it was going to expire. You didn't have visibility. And we generally find that corporations say they have so many thousands of machine identities, and they have 10 times that. They just don't have visibility. So how do you protect something you don't have visibility on? How do you protect against it unless you have visibility on it? So the first thing is visibility. So we've very sophisticated techniques for getting visibility inside and outside of an organization, because some research we released today, and I don't know if you saw it, and it was research done by Georgia State University. It was the evidence-based cybersecurity research part of the School of Engineering, and they combined with University of Surrey, and they came up. They went into the dark web, they went into the deep web, and they found literally thousands and thousands of machine identities for sale. Not only machine identities packaged up with fake companies, machine identities packaged up to create places on the internet that people would potentially go to thinking they're going to a bank and they're going to an attacker's website.
And by machine identity, largely you're looking at SSL certificates of some kind.
SSL and TLS, SSH keys, API keys, code signing certificates. So one of the really interesting things that came out of the research was a package for sale that had a fake company, it had a company address, it had a DUNS number. All this is about creating a company. Certificates, code signing certificates that went with it. And this is a very well-known brand of a company. This is for sale on the dark web. So the bad guys get this. I think sometimes the bad guys get this more than the good guys.
And they can assume that identity, and it's very valid.
Stand up with it. It's very valid. It's a certificate that, for all intents and purposes, it's valid, but it looks like it belongs to somebody it doesn't belong to. And so it's a way to steal identity. So anyway, the first thing is visibility. And so we have very sophisticated ways for doing that inside and out. Second is intelligence, because just because you see it, you don't know what it means. Does it conform to policy? Do we know where it came from? How long has it been there? What's it associated with? What does it have access to? All these kinds of things you need to know in an access management system. What's it mean? And then the third thing, and probably the most important, is we automate the heck out of everything, because the systems from 5 years ago worked at the speed of 5 years ago. The number of machine identities is 1,000 times greater, and the speed is 1,000,000 times greater. You'd have to hire 100 more people in most companies to deal with it in the old way. So you
automate the remediation.
We automate the remediation.
Oh, I'm so happy that a lot of people I talk to are saying this when you've described the problem, the solution,
and then they stop.
And then it's like, well, you got to fix it. But now, folks like you are saying, we're helping you automate the remediation. That is so critical today. We can't get around that because of the scale of we're deploying things today.
So if you think of a corporation that needs to know where all the people are and what their identities are, they also need to know the machines and the identities of the machines. And that means these machines are everywhere, and they're different kinds, and they touch everything, and machine identities are everywhere. So we created an investment vehicle we call the Machine Identity Protection Development Fund, and we put $12.5 million into it. And what we're doing is we're paying people or investing in companies to build connections back into the Venafi platform, because that's what our customers need. Because as they bring on like HashiCorp or Kubernetes, or you mentioned Jenkins and Kafka and all these tool sets, or you bring on Azure or AWS or the Google Cloud, there's interfaces that are needed, and these all need to be developed. So we're paying people to do it. We're building the ecosystem, and I don't think anybody else has even conceptualized doing this. Yeah,
I love it, because having worked with these various components, right, they all need to have some level of trust with each other. And if you shortcut that process, as you've given examples already, really bad things can happen,
Really
right?
bad
If
things.
you don't pay attention to it, and having the facility to be able to trust that this server trusts that server and this app trusts this app, that is so important today, and it really allows you to take your systems and security to the next level. If not, your whole foundation is crumbling beneath you.
You've heard of zero trust.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so zero trust means that sort of the perimeter's gone away, so you can't trust anything because there's nothing inside or outside anymore. So what's that really mean? That means you have to use something to decide on, does this belong to me or not? Should I try and protect it or protect against it? Becomes identity. And so machine identity is actually the foundation of zero trust. And if you don't protect those identities, you can't set up a zero trust environment. So people are just starting to understand this. I mean, the world's changing so fast, and this thing called machine identity and protecting them is just, it's a new concept to a whole lot of people. And we're way out in front, and that's what we do, is we educate people on this.
And you've got a great research team, and you've done some research on the dark web. How prevalent are machine identities, and what's the going rate on the dark web?
As I mentioned earlier, they're everywhere. I mean, there's thousands of them for sale on the dark web, and they are probably 100 times more valuable than a human identity.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we've found packages bundled with services on how you use it to attack somebody for up to $2,500 per identity.
Wow. Yeah, that's
and what's that
interesting.
tell you? That tells you they are very valuable, and they're being used, and it's just invisible to us. So we're really doing our best to try and protect the world, because, and this is something most people don't think about, as a species, we're facing something that we've never faced before, which is the fact that machines, this year, machines are going to be making real-time life and death decisions about humans. And not on the battlefield in Syria, but I'm talking about in the streets of San Francisco and New York. Imagine a self-driving car going down a road, and a truck pulls out in front of it. Is it going to hit the truck, or is it going to potentially kill the people in the car, or is it going to swerve and kill people on the sidewalk? It's a machine driving that car. It's a piece of code. And machine's not going to check back with anybody. It's not going to ask a human. It's going to make a real-time decision on who lives and dies. How important is it that we have an identity that we trust and is protected on that? Because if you're a bad guy, you want to shut down any city in the world, do 3 of those things at the same time, the whole city shuts down.
Right.
And so identity, protecting the identity to make sure that the piece of software that's driving that car is the one that's supposed to be there, it's like critically important. We're at just a juncture, and this is, most people don't understand. Even people, practitioners here at RSA, they don't get this. Machines are becoming so critically important. We must identify them.
It's scary when I think of it in the context of Skynet, and how machines interact in science fiction. But what you're describing is very much a reality of today, of the dangers that could happen if we don't get a handle on the security and the trust and verification of what's happening with the machine
identity is fundamental to that. How do you trust something unless you can identify it?
Right.
And if that identity is a fake identity, how can you build trust? You can't. So we need some belief, and we need something to prove that we can trust these identities. And that's the business we're in, is protecting machine identities. So this whole thing we've built, in fact, digital transformation's changing the world, right? We just had an example of that, self-driving cars. There's only one threat to it. It's not Moore's Law. It's not lack of 5G. It's not bigger screens. It's not 8K displays or lack thereof. It's, can we secure this thing we've built?
It's an excellent point. That technology is being held back because of security, which is tied to health and public safety. Right.
And then you take one step further and you think about privacy. And we're in I call it, and somebody else has coined this phrase, surveillance capitalism, where people make money. Technology in and of itself is not bad, but when it's used to surveil every single step that somebody takes, to be able to predict what they're going to do and then sell that to somebody to monetize somebody's future actions. You know, you can go to places in this country and you can Google things and you won't even find mention of some technology issues because you're in Kansas and nobody cares in Kansas. And it's just fascinating the way perception can get molded and sold. And so I think privacy is a huge deal. And you think about machine identities, one of the things they do is they guarantee privacy of transmission from the originator to the application or the server and back again. They encrypt that. And so somebody can take over those identities. Not only do they assume the identity that's trusted, but now they can communicate in private, or they can surveil. And it's just, most people don't understand it, but it's fundamental.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.